The evening she came, the sky was already a bruise. Wind combed the grass into one long sigh, and the sun dragged itself behind the buttes like a tired horse. I remember the smell of iron in the dust and the way the barn door clicked against its latch. Small sound that felt louder than talk. It was the hour when a man notices what the day took and what it left. I had not expected it to leave me a woman, in a torn blue dress, hair tangled with grit, eyes like someone who had run out of places to apologize. She stopped at the gate as if it were a church threshold, hands on the weatherwood, breath hitching. I didn't move from the porch. Years of living with my own ghost had taught me that false mercy loves to sprint, but real mercy learns to listen to the wind first. She lifted her chin and stepped forward, the dress catching on a nail, a soft rip, a quick wind she swallowed. When she reached the yard, she didn't curtsy or smile. She cupped a palm to shade her face and said, not much louder than the wing-beat of sparrow, "Please, just one chance." It was not the first time beggars had come up my road, and it would not be the last. But there was something in the way the dust clung to her, as if the earth itself had not wanted to let her go. My name is Colt Renshaw. It had been years since anyone said it with warmth. I set my coffee down. "Water's in the trough," I said, and nodded toward the pump. She swayed once and steadied herself. If gratitude moved in her, it moved quiet, the way creek water ribbons under ice. The pump squealed. Water caught the last of the light and shattered it into little pieces on her wrists. She drank like someone trying not to make trouble even for her own throat. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and only then did I see the small folded paper she kept squeezed tight, creased, sweat soft, the edges furred with the miles. She didn't offer it. I didn't ask. There's an ache some people carry that feels familiar even to a stranger. The ranch kept me company. Fence lines, dark-backed cattle, the breath of my old sorrel mare. They had all grown used to my silence. A man who has lost and learned not to mention it becomes heavy in the hinge of his jaw. I told her there was an empty bunk in the tack room if she needed a roof for the night. "I can work," she said, the words stumbling into each other. "I can work for it." "What's your name?" I asked. "Evelyn May Carter." The name reached somewhere inside me I had boarded up with barnwood and wire. Not because I knew her, but because of the care she took with it, as if a name might be a small wild thing that spooks if you say it wrong. Young Eli came from the shadows then, a bucket in each hand, and eyes open wide like lanterns. "Evening, miss," he said, shifting from foot to foot. He looked at me, looked at her, then took the buckets past us and kept his questions tucked behind his teeth. The boy knew the shape of my mood better than any grown man in Dry Creek. Night fell gentle, and the heat left the boards. I brought a loaf to the tack room and set it on the trunk. Evelyn stood near the bunk with her hands clasped low, a posture that made me think of Sunday warnings and a scolding she'd swallowed long ago. "There's coffee on at dawn," I said, and she said, "Thank you, Mr. Renshaw." So softly I felt it more than heard it. The townspeople found out before the moon was full, as they always do when the wind favors gossip over rain. I rode into Dry Creek for feed, and Miss Ada Quinn was already posted on her porch, a lace shawl wound like a net around her shoulders. Her eyes glinted the way a woman's does when charity and judgment have learned to share a chair. "Colt Renshaw," she called, slicing my name neat. "I hear you've taken in the Carter woman." "I took in a worker for the week," I answered. She leaned forward, a vulture polite enough to wear perfume. "They say she ran out on her husband's debts. They say she took more than bread when she left. People say a great number of things when the crop fails." I said. The general store chimes tinkled. Deputy Hank, Lyle glanced up from the pickle barrel and didn't bother to hide the measuring in his eyes. Men like Hank are paid in coin minted from other folks' worry. By afternoon, the talk had spread like a brush fire, fast, hungry, and wrong. When I got back, Evelyn was mending a break in the west fence. She had the wire clamped and her lip between her teeth, and there was blood beating on her palm where the bar had found its mark. She didn't look up when I dismounted. Shame could be a saddle that galls even when you're standing still. "You missed lunch," I said. She shook her head. I set a tin plate on the post and stepped away. I watched her notice the bread of breath too late to pretend she hadn't. She ate in small, even bites, as if not to embarrass the food. Work has a way of telling the truth that talk cannot. She tended the horses like she'd been born near their breath. She knew the soft triangle of space beneath the jaw, where a mare likes to be scratched. She moved with the carefulness of someone who has learned that sudden joy breaks like glass if you handle it rough. I tried not to watch, and watched. The first storm came 2 nights later, one of those quick-tempered summer tempests that buck over the ridge without warning. The sky went green and the air smelled of tin. I had just latched the last shutter when Eli came running, hat in his hands, eyes big as saddle conchos. Mr. Renshaw. The filly. She stuck by the arroyo. She toppled the gate. We ran. The wind flattened the grass and lifted grit in stinging sheets. Lightning stitched the edge of the world shut, and then ripped it open again, down by the arroyo. The sorrel filly thrashed in a pocket of soft mud, panic making the mud deeper with every kick. Evelyn was already in the slick, boots vanishing, dress swallowing rain. She had her arms around a yearling's neck, whispering to it. Nonsense sounds, lullabies, the slow hushes of someone soothing themselves as much as the creature they're saving. Hold her head. I shouted, but the wind took the words. I slid in beside her. The mud sucked at my legs like it wanted to keep what it had. The fillies I rolled white. Easy, girl, Evelyn said, and the way she said girl cut me clean, tender, steady, as if the word itself could build a bridge out of fear. We worked by feel more than sight, the rain blurring our hands. Eli braced himself on a root and got the rope around the chest. I counted U.S. and without counting. We heaved. The filly lurched forward and nearly took us with her, but then there it was, the give, the sudden lightness of something freed. She bolted toward the fence, trembling and wild again, and we were left knee-deep and shaking, mud cold as riverstone around our calves. Evelyn started to laugh then, though it was mostly sobbing. I just didn't want it to die, she whispered, teeth chattering, as if the confession were a sin. Her hair was rope wet. A black braid slapped loose and clinging to her cheek. I didn't think. I gathered her up in my arms, more careful than I meant to be, and carried her toward the house as if weight could be honored by slow steps. Inside, the fire had a reluctant hold of its wood. Thunder fumbled across the roof. I set a blanket around her shoulders. She kept her hands lifted, hovering over the heat like a penitent over candlelight. There are moments when a man can hear his own life turning, like a wagon wheel crossing from sand to stone. I stood there dripping and thought of my late wife, how pride had made my love a narrow door, how grief had lived in me like an outlaw I refused amnesty. Evelyn's lips trembled, not cold only, but something older than weather. You should send me on in mourning, she said. It'll be easier. Folks around here, they remember. People remember loud. I said, they forget soft. I don't know why I said that, except that it was suddenly true. She fell asleep in the chair, head tipped toward the mantel. The fire did what fires do, turned it into a language you feel in your bones. I sat opposite and let it speak. A drip from my sleeve ticked on the hearthstone. I don't know how long I studied the braiding of shadow and light across her face, but I remember the steadiness that came into the room like a third person, and how the wind, having shouted at us all evening, quieted as if tired of its own voice. I woke before dawn out of habit, made coffee, and set the cup on the porch rail, where the day first puts its shoulder. The yard smelled of wet dust, that sweet ache the desert offers as apology after tantrum. Eli was feeding in the lower pen. The filly lifted her head, snorted soft, and went back to chewing. The world, it seemed, was willing to go on. I had just reached for the door when a horse's hooves thudded on the hard pan. A single rider came off the trail, rain-polished badge glinting. Deputy Hank. Lyle swung down with the casualness of a man who thinks the ground is always glad to have him. He tied off with showy neatness. Morning, Renshaw. Hank. I answered, the word tasting like an old coin. He pushed his hat back and let his eyes walk the porch. Heard you had company, he said. I figured I'd do the neighborly thing. Neighbors usually bring pie. He smiled without humor. Pies for saints. I brought paper. He patted his coat pocket, and the way he did it, slow, deliberate, a little cruel, made the morning colder than it was. Town's been remembering. The Carter woman's got accounts unsettled. There's talk she took what wasn't hers when she lit out. Now, we ain't talking about hanging. We're talking about a conversation down at the office. Questions. Maybe a night or two to jog a memory. Evelyn stood in the doorway behind me before I could turn to warn her. She had washed the mud from her hair, and it lay smooth now, dark as the space between stars. She said nothing. Her hands were folded much the same way I'd seen them the first night, polite, as if she still believed in the courtesy of judgment. Hank's gaze flicked to her and softened into the kind a man saves for a cornered bird. "Ma'am," he said, and tipped his hat. "We won't make a fuss if you come quiet. Might be you explain yourself, and we all go home to our breakfasts." Evelyn lifted her chin, a slow sunrise I felt even in my fingertips. "There's not much to explain," she said. "My husband died owing men who wanted coin more than God. They pressed until I could not breathe. I did not steal anything but away." "You ran," Hank said, coaxing her into the word, as if it could be used later to buy him a favor. "I survived," she said, and that, too, was a confession. The wind teased the edge of the paper in his pocket. A bluebird rasped in the cottonwood like a small saw. I could feel the whole of my past arranging itself on my shoulders, the old habits laying their hands on me. Stay out of it. Let the law do its tidy work. Save your sanctuary, even if it means the world outside gets leaner. There was a nobility to cowardice if you dressed it in the right coat. I had worn that coat a long time. I had also felt its weight. Hank glanced at me. "You'll hand her over, Colt. It ain't worth the bother otherwise. Men respect you when you respect the order of things." The order of things was one of those phrases that sound like a hymn until you hear the chorus it silences. I looked at Evelyn's profile, the stubborn grace of it, the small tremor in the lip that a less careful man would have mistaken for guilt. My hand found the doorframe and gripped the wood, so hard a sliver drove up under the nail. Pain, clean and informative, traveled like a spark to the place where I make decisions. Eli had stopped in the yard without realizing it. A scoop of feed held midair, watching us all with the kind of attention a child pays the moment a story becomes legend. The sun had just touched the rim of the world and laid a thin gold line across the porch like a dare. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote loped over a ridge, alone and unashamed. "Colt," Hank asked, half patient, half promising trouble. I could feel the old door of me trying to shut, the narrow one, the one I had used to keep out weather and sorrow and the sound of my own heart thawing. I met Evelyn's eyes for the first real time since she'd said my name. There was fear and something braver standing beside it. Not hope exactly. People like us don't waste hope on strangers. It was a strict kind of dignity, the kind that keeps you from begging twice. She didn't say a thing. She didn't have to. The coffee had gone cold on the rail. The day smelled of ash and rain and decision. Hank took out the folded paper and snapped it open with a little show. The words on it meant less to me than the weight in the air. For the first time in years, I didn't know whose side my heart was on. The deputy's shadow left long after his horse did. Dust hung where he'd been, thin and mean, then drifted apart like a lie that couldn't hold itself together. The paper he'd handed me still lay folded on the porch rail, damp with dew, but the law on it had no teeth once it touched the soil. Evelyn stood by the gate, her face calm the way a horizon looks calm before thunder. Eli busied himself with chores, though his movements had the stiffness of a boy who's heard a story go wrong. I didn't tell her to stay, and she didn't tell me thank you. The silence between us was its own language, one built from the hush of feed scoops, the murmur of the wind through horse tails, and the quiet shame of wanting something good enough to risk losing it. I found her later by the creek behind the barn, the one that cut through stone like patience cuts through pain. She was washing a torn sleeve, her hands moving slow, deliberate, as if the cloth might tear from too much forgiveness. "They'll come again," she said, not looking up. "Maybe," I said, "but maybe they'll come for something different next time." She wrung the water out, and the drops fell bright against the shadowed sand. I didn't run from what I did. Colt, I ran from what people wanted me to be afterward. There's a difference. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I'd done the same, though my prison had been grief, not gossip. But words would only bruise what was already healing in her. Instead, I found a plank that needed fixing and started hammering. The sound filled the space where we might have wept. By week's end, the town's patience thinned. Miss Ada Quinn came herself, a bonnet perched on the idea of righteousness, and half of Dry Creek followed her up my road. The sun stood hard above them, cruel and white. Ada called out before her horse had even stopped moving. "Colt Renshaw, you'll lose what good name you got left, harboring a thief and a liar." I stepped off the porch, the dust swirling around my boots. "She's done more honest work in a week than some folks have managed in their whole lives," I said. Ada's mouth pinched, and her hands tightened on the reins. Decency don't get washed clean by sweat. Before I could answer, a shout rose from behind the barn. Eli's voice, high and cracking. Fire. The smell hit first, pitch and dry hay turning to smoke. A lantern must have tipped. The crowd scattered, some toward the pump, others simply backward, away from the heat that roared to life. Evelyn ran past me, skirts lifted, her body all movement and light. She didn't pause for orders or for safety. She went straight into the smoke as if the flame had called her by name. I followed, vision stinging. The barn glowed from within, beams popping like gunshots. One of the stall doors had jammed, and inside a horse screamed. The sound of a creature that still believes it can be saved. Evelyn's silhouette cut through the haze. She threw her shoulder against the latch, once, twice, until it gave. I saw her lead the animal out by its mane, coughing, her hair tangled with ash. Sparks caught on her dress, small stars that she beat away with her bare hands. The roof groaned. I caught her wrist and dragged her clear as a beam came down behind us. She hit the ground hard, gasping but alive. Together we watched the flames swallow the last of the old wood. Ada and her followers stood at a distance, the firelight turning their faces into masks of orange disbelief. When the last embers sank into themselves, Ada spoke again, quieter this time. Maybe she just needed one more chance after all. Then she turned her horse and left, taking the crowd with her. Evelyn's palms were raw, blistered from where she'd fought the latch. I bandaged them with what linen I could spare. She winced only once, then smiled, a small, tired thing that made the night seem wider. "You'll have to rebuild," she said. "We'll have to," I corrected. Morning found the ranch smelling of smoke and damp earth. The barn was a blackened skeleton, but the horses grazed in peace, unhurt. The sky had that fragile color that comes after a storm, like a wound deciding to close. Evelyn woke late, wrapped in my old blanket on the couch. She blinked at the light through the window, unsure she belonged to this quiet. "I'll be going today," she murmured. "Where to? Doesn't matter. Folks won't forget. They never do." I poured her coffee, the sound of it filling the space her fear had made. "Maybe forgetting's not the point," I said. "Maybe remembering different is." She looked at me then, really looked, the kind of seeing that strips both people down to their truth. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked. "Because I should have been kinder before," I said, "to someone who's gone. I didn't know how then." Her eyes softened, not out of pity but understanding. "You know how now," she said. The days that followed passed in a rhythm that felt older than us both. She stayed, not because she owed me, but because she wanted to. She and Eli rebuilt the smaller shed first. I mended the fences. We spoke little. The wind did most of the talking, carrying the smell of sage and smoke through the hollow boards. Once, while I worked the post-hole digger, she brought me water and wiped the sweat from my brow with her bandaged hand. I remember that touch more clearly than any kiss I've ever had. By the end of summer, the town had found new stories to feed on. Ada waved once from her wagon and didn't speak. The ranch was whole again, not prettier, but steadier. Evelyn hummed sometimes while she worked, tuneless songs that seemed borrowed from the land itself. Years later, when I tell this to whoever will listen, I don't start with the fire or the deputy or the gossip. I start with her voice that first night, the way it trembled and still managed to rise. I tell them mercy doesn't thunder or blaze. It arrives quieter, like a woman at your gate, asking for one chance. She never spoke of that night again, and neither did I. The ranch grew green in spring, brown in fall, steady as breathing. Evelyn stayed until her hair silvered like dawn frost. When she laughed, the sound had the same texture as rain finally finding dry ground. I buried her on the hill that looks west, where the sunsets burn slow. Sometimes when the wind comes down from the mesa, I swear it carries her name, low and sweet, reminding me what we almost didn't have the courage to keep. If you ever find yourself standing before someone who's asking for one more chance, remember this. Grace doesn't always look holy, and forgiveness doesn't sound grand. Sometimes it's just a hand left open, steady in the dust while the rest of the world turns away.